Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Today, we are tackling a classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, first published in 1936.
Wow, 1936.
And it's still flying off the shelves.
That's amazing. It's interesting when you think about Carnegie himself. He really embodies that whole self-made
All
thing.
right. Yeah.
Like he wasn't some scholar, born with a silver spoon, grew up on a farm, Missouri, I think it was, and had like very little formal education.
Really?
Yeah. And yet he managed to become this incredibly influential figure in, well, the world of human interaction, you could say.
Huh. So it's like he learned all this stuff the hard way, through
Yeah.
experience, trial, and error.
Exactly. And then he turned around and wrote like, this incredible guidebook to help the rest of us navigate, well, people.
It's like a cheat sheet for understanding what makes people tick, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things he talks about that I think is so important is this idea that criticizing people is about the least effective way to get them to change their behavior.
Oh, yeah. He talks about not kicking over the beehive, right?
Exactly. He says that, like, people rarely, if ever, blame themselves for anything, even when they're dead wrong.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? We've all been there. So what's the alternative?
Well, Carnegie uses this example of Two Gun Crowley, the gangster.
Oh, right. I've heard that story.
Even when Crowley was cornered by the police, like totally caught red-handed, he still insisted that he was a misunderstood public benefactor.
Wow. Talk about being delusional.
Right. But it just shows how deeply ingrained this instinct is, this need to justify our actions, even when we're in the wrong.
So if criticizing is like poking a beehive, what's the best way to approach those situations where, someone's messed up?
Okay, so Carnegie was a big fan of Benjamin Franklin.
That makes sense. Two brilliant minds.
And Franklin, as you know, was all about understanding and forgiveness. He famously said, "Speak ill of no man, and speak all the good I know of everybody."
Okay, so more Benjamin Franklin, less, well, I don't know, angry hornet.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on blame, shift your perspective. See if you can understand where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with their actions.
And forgiveness, too, like genuinely letting go of that anger and resentment.
Totally. Now, that's not always easy. I get it.
Right, forgiveness is tough.
But it's essential if you want to move forward and maintain a healthy relationship. But Carnegie also talks about the importance of appreciation.
Okay, I'm all for a little positivity, but does a pat on the back really have that much impact?
You'd be surprised. Like, take Stevie Wonder, for example.
Mm.
As a young boy, blind, and one of his teachers recognized his incredible hearing, just like this inherent talent he had.
And
So one day, she asked him to help find a lost mouse in the classroom.
oh, that's sweet.
It seems like a small thing, right? But think about it. That simple act of appreciation, of recognizing Stevie Wonder's unique gift, it ignited a passion in him that changed the course of his life.
Wow. And like, she could have just asked any other kid to find the mouse, but by choosing Stevie, she showed him that his talent was valuable, that he was special.
Exactly. And that's the thing about appreciation. It's not just about being nice. It's about seeing the best in people, even when they don't see it in themselves.
Okay, I love that. So don't criticize, appreciate. Got it. What else you got, Carnegie?
Okay, this one's a little tougher. Carnegie's next principle is, it's not about you.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah, I know, right? A little humility check never hurt anyone.
So how do we put that into practice? What does that even mean? It's not about you.
It means recognizing that people are primarily interested in their own wants and needs.
Well, yeah.
Like we all are. But to truly connect with someone, to really influence them, you have to speak to their desires, not just your own.
So how do we do that? How do we figure out what someone else wants?
He uses this analogy of trying to get a calf into a barn.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
You can push and pull all you want, but that calf's going to resist if it's not what IT wants.
Stubborn things, calves.
Right. But offer it some warm milk, something it craves, and it'll happily follow you anywhere. It's the same with people. Figure out what motivates them, and then frame your request, your idea, your whatever, in a way that aligns with that desire.
So it's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But maybe you can make the water look extra appealing.
Exactly. It's about understanding what the other person wants, what makes them tick, and then finding a way to connect your idea to that desire.
So it's not about manipulation.
No, not at all. It's about finding common ground, about building bridges instead of walls.
Okay, I like that. Building bridges, not walls.
And this idea, it's echoed by like a bunch of great leaders throughout history. Lloyd George, for example, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War I. He was known for his ability to connect with people.
And I bet he had to deal with some strong personalities.
Right. And when asked about his success, he said, "I learned that it is a fatal mistake to tell a man what you think of him."
Ouch. Okay, so no brutal honesty.
Well, he followed that up with, "If you want to know whether you are right, observe what happens when you have tried to put people right."
Interesting. So actions speak louder than words, and maybe understanding beats trying to force your viewpoint onto someone.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the other person's perspective.
Fascinating. Okay, so no criticizing, appreciate people's strengths, focus on their needs. This Carnegie guy was onto something. What else do you have for us?
He really was. Okay, so ready for the next level. Carnegie's next set of principles.
Get me with them.
All right, so these are all about like maximizing your likability.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. Everyone wants to be liked, right?
Exactly. And these are things, honestly, that seem like common sense, but you'd be surprised how often we forget them in, the heat of the moment.
Especially these days, right? Everyone's so busy and stressed.
Totally. So Carnegie's first tip for boosting your likability, get ready for it.
Okay, I'm waiting.
Become genuinely interested in other people.
Okay, that sounds deceptively simple. How do you even do that? Like asking for a friend, sometimes people are just not that interesting, you know?
Right. But you don't have to fake it. It's about shifting your perspective. Carnegie gives this example of Theodore Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt, didn't he know, like, everyone?
Right. He was famous for his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. And his secret: whenever he was expecting a visitor, he'd stay up late the night before, researching whatever topics age he knew that person was interested in.
Wow. Okay, so he did his homework.
Exactly. It wasn't just about, like, superficial charm. Roosevelt genuinely cared about what other people had to say.
So it's not about pretending to be interested, it's about finding something to actually be interested in.
Exactly. Okay, next tip. And this one's huge GE, even though it seems small. Remember people's names.
Oh God, tell me about it. I am the worst with names. It's like my brain just refuses to retain them.
But Carnegie would say it's all about focus, right? When you meet someone new, really concentrate on their name, repeat it back to them, use it in conversation a few times if you can. You can even jot it down later if you need to.
Okay, that's a good tip. I need all the help I can get in that department. So be genuinely interested, remember names. Anything else?
Yeah, this one's Bibby. Be a good listener.
Oh man, that's harder than it sounds. I'm so bad at interrupting.
We all do it.
Yeah.
But Carnegie would say when you feel that urge to jump in, to interrupt, that's when you need to double down on listening. Ask clarifying questions, or try to see things from their perspective. Everyone wants to feel heard, right?
Yeah, that's so true. It's like that saying, to be interesting, be interested. The more you listen, the more interesting people will find you.
Exactly. Plus, you never know what you might learn. Okay, last but not least, Carnegie says, find something to admire in the other person.
Ooh, I like this one. We all have something admirable about us, right? Even if it's buried under, like, a mountain of quirks.
Right. It could be their sense of humor, their work ethic, their taste in music, whatever. Find it. Acknowledge it sincerely. A little genuine appreciation goes a long way.
Love it. Okay, so we've covered being likable, but what about when it comes to, like, actual disagreements? Because
Yeah.
let's be real, not every conversation is going to be sunshine and roses. How do we get people to see things our way without, resorting to, like, all-out war?
Right. So this is where things get really interesting. Carnegie has a whole section on winning people to your way of thinking without argument.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. I'm trying to be more persuasive, but I also hate conflict.
Well, Carnegie's first point is you can't win an argument. Like, even if you're right, you lose goodwill. It's a Pyrrhic victory.
So even if you win, you actually lose.
Exactly. You might prove your point, but you damage the relationship.
That makes sense. It's like when you win an argument with your partner, but then you're both, like, stewing about it for hours afterward.
Right. Carnegie tells this story about a man who was in this heated dispute with a tax inspector over a $9,000 debt. The more they argued, the more entrenched they became in their positions.
Oof, I've been there. It's like digging your heels in, right? Refusing to budge.
Exactly. But then the man did something unexpected. Instead of arguing his case further, he shifted gears and started expressing appreciation for the tax inspector's work, acknowledged the complexity of the tax code, the challenges of the job, all that.
Interesting strategy. Did it work?
The inspector's whole demeanor changed. His tone softened, he started opening up, and eventually they were able to reach a compromise.
Wow. So sometimes the best way to win is to, like, not even play the game.
Exactly. And, this ties into another one of Carnegie's principles.
Yeah.
Be willing to admit when you're wrong.
Oof, that's a tough one. No one likes admitting they're wrong.
True, but think about it. It disarms people. When you acknowledge your own fallibility, it's hard for them to stay angry.
So it's like letting the air out of the balloon.
Exactly. Carnegie gives this great example of Robert E. Lee.
Oh, yeah, the Civil War general.
Right. After the devastating loss at Gettysburg, Lee took full responsibility for the defeat, even though a lot of things contributed to it.
That's going to be hard, especially for a leader.
Right. But it's also what makes him such a respected figure, even today.
Okay, so no arguing, admit when you're wrong. What else?
All right, before you even dive into a disagreement, Carnegie says, find some common ground. Start by emphasizing what you agree on.
So start with a yes and work your way toward more yeses.
Exactly. Carnegie calls it getting the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Hmm.
And it creates this more collaborative atmosphere, making them more receptive to your perspective.
Interesting. So it's all about like framing.
It is. But the key is be genuine. Don't manipulate, guide. The goal is to understand where they're coming from.
Empathy, right. That's going to be huge in resolving conflicts.
Huge. And, Carnegie noticed this even with, like, notorious outlaws.
Outlaws, like cowboys and robbers.
Yeah. Like Jesse James, for example. These guys often saw themselves as, like, Robin Hood figures fighting for a cause.
Wow, interesting. So even the bad guys have their own narratives.
Exactly. They have their reasons, their justifications. And that's why Carnegie suggests always try to assume the best in people, even if you don't agree with them.
Okay, so even when someone's being a total jerk, try to see it from their side.
It doesn't mean excusing their behavior. It's about understanding their motivation.
I like that. Okay, so we're being empathetic, looking for common ground, all that good stuff. But what about those times when someone's just plain wrong, like factually incorrect? What do you do then?
Good question. This is where Carnegie's next principle comes in. Dramatize your ideas.
Ooh, okay,
Yeah.
a little drama. I'm here for it.
It's about making your ideas vivid, memorable. Don't just state the facts. Tell a story. Paint a picture with your words. Use an analogy.
Ooh, I love good analogy.
Right. Carnegie tells this great story about a safety engineer who's trying to get factory workers to follow safety protocols around some dangerous machinery.
Important stuff, but not exactly like the most thrilling topic.
Right. So the engineer, he'd tried everything. Lectures, statistics, all of it. Nothing was sticking.
Yeah, safety lectures can be a little dry.
Totally. So he gathers the workers together and he asks them, how many of you have ever scalded your hand under a hot water tap?
Oof, we've all been there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Get some nodding along.
Oh,
right? And then he asks them to calculate like what the temperature of that water would be if you added the temperature of the room to the temperature of the hot water coming out of the tap.
Okay, I'm following.
So they do the math and it's like dangerously high, obviously. Then the engineer just looks at them and says, wouldn't it be a good idea to keep your hands off those motors?
Brilliant. He took something kind of abstract and made it real, relatable.
Exactly. So don't just present the information, bring it to life.
It's like that saying, show, don't tell. Make it vivid. Make it memorable.
Exactly. Okay, last principle for winning people to your way of thinking. Throw down a challenge.
Ooh, a little friendly competition. I like it.
Right. Carnegie believed that most people, they want to prove themselves. They want to rise to the occasion.
So instead of saying, you need to do this, you say, I bet you can't do this.
Exactly. Frame it as a challenge, and suddenly it becomes way more appealing.
I like it. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. From handling criticism to giving it to understanding what makes people tick. Anything else, or are we ready to move on to leadership?
Oh, we're definitely getting into leadership. Carnegie had a lot to say about that. But it's important to remember his approach to leadership isn't about like bossing people around. It's about inspiring them to change.
Okay, I like that. Lead with kindness, not with force.
Exactly. And his first principle for becoming a leader who inspires change is this. If you must find fault, this is the way to begin with praise and honest appreciation.
So the classic sandwich method. A little praise, a little constructive criticism, and then more praise to soften the blow.
You got it. Carnegie tells this story about President McKinley.
Oh, I love a good presidential anecdote.
So McKinley had to give feedback to this politician who had written a truly terrible campaign speech.
Ooh, that's gotta be awkward.
Right. So McKinley starts by praising the speech, calling it splendid and magnificent.
Okay, that's maybe stretching the truth a little, but I see what he's doing, setting a positive tone.
Exactly. He wanted to soften the blow before gently suggesting that, maybe the speech wasn't quite right for the occasion.
It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of saying things the right way, Carnegie's next principle is all about how to criticize and not be hated for it.
Ooh, that's a skill I could definitely improve on. I always worry about coming across as harsh, even when I don't mean to.
Well, Carnegie says the key is to be indirect. So instead of pointing out someone's fault directly, try to hint at it subtly or use a story to illustrate your point.
Hmm. So be more like a gentle nudge than a sledgehammer.
Exactly. He gives this perfect example of this with Charles Schwab. So Schwab was walking through one of his steel mills one day, and he saw some of his employees smoking under a no-smoking sign.
Uh-oh, busted.
Right. But instead of yelling at them or writing them up, Schwab, he walks over, hands each of them a cigar, and says, "I'll appreciate it, boys, if you will smoke these on the outside."
Wow, that's brilliant. He turned a potentially tense situation into this moment of, like, camaraderie.
Exactly.
Mm.
And you can bet those employees, they were much more likely to follow the rules in the future after that.
Okay, so lead by example, show kindness,
Huh.
and maybe offer a cigar or two.
Exactly. All right, next leadership principle. Focus on the positive. Praise improvement, no matter how small, and ignore the negative as much as possible.
Oh, I love that. Celebrate the wins, don't sweat the small stuff.
Right? He says that we should praise improvement, no matter how small, and ignore the negative as much as possible.
It's all about like shifting your focus, right? What you focus on expands. If you're constantly pointing out flaws, that's all people will see. But if you acknowledge their efforts, you encourage them to keep growing.
And that is powerful.
This is so powerful. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from handling criticism to giving it to understanding what truly motivates people. But I'm curious about Carnegie's take on encouraging that growth, especially when it comes to leadership. What does he have to say about that?
Well, one of his key principles for inspiring change is captured beautifully in the phrase, use encouragement, make the fault seem easy to correct. No one wants to feel like they're failing constantly.
Right, and sometimes the smallest things can feel insurmountable when you're feeling discouraged.
Exactly. By focusing on someone's potential, on making that path to improvement seem achievable, you unlock a whole new level of motivation.
I love that. Do you have a favorite example of this principle in action?
Carnegie tells this great story about a young boy who was struggling terribly in school, like really on the verge of giving up.
Aw, poor kid.
But then his teacher noticed his handwriting.
His handwriting.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And instead of focusing on the boy's academic struggles, she chose to praise his penmanship.
That's so smart. She found something he excelled at and focused on that.
Exactly. And that small bit of encouragement, it changed everything for that young boy. He went from being a failing student to making the honor roll.
Wow, that's the power of encouragement. It reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel."
Exactly. And Carnegie would argue that this principle applies to all of us, not just kids. We all crave recognition, encouragement, especially when we're feeling down on ourselves.
Absolutely. So important to remember that. Okay, so what's Carnegie's final piece of advice for becoming a leader who inspires change?
His last principle focuses on motivation. It's called making people glad to do what you want. And it boils down to this.
Right.
Everyone wants to feel important and valued.
Oh, 100%.
Right. No one likes to feel like a cog in the machine.
Exactly. Like, I want to know that my contributions matter, that I'm making a difference.
Exactly. And Carnegie illustrates this with a story about Woodrow Wilson.
Okay, hit me with a presidential anecdote.
So Wilson wanted to appoint his friend, Colonel Edward House, to a critical diplomatic role during World War I.
Makes sense. You want someone you trust in that position.
Right. The problem was, his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, was really hoping to get that appointment himself.
Ooh, awkward. That's a recipe for some serious tension. How did Wilson handle that?
He appealed to Bryan's ego.
His ego?
He told Bryan that he was actually too important for the job.
Wait, really?
Yeah. He said that Bryan's presence in Europe would attract too much attention and it could jeopardize the delicate negotiations that were going on.
Wow. So he flattered him into accepting a rejection.
Exactly. And it worked. Bryan felt completely satisfied. He was honored to be considered, too important for the mission.
That's amazing. It's like you said, everyone, even at the highest levels of government, wants to feel valued.
Exactly. And, when you think about it, all of Carnegie's principles come back to that, don't they? It's about approaching people with genuine respect and understanding, even when it's difficult.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing their humanity, their strengths, their desires. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like you've given me a whole new playbook for human
I'm
interaction.
so glad to hear that.
Hmm.
And remember, these principles, they're not just for business leaders or politicians, they're for all of us.
Yeah.
We can all benefit from a little more kindness, a little more understanding.
Absolutely. And you don't have to read a whole book about it. We've done the hard work for you. It's kidding. But seriously, I feel like I learned so much from this conversation, and I hope our listeners did too.
You too.
It's amazing how relevant this book still is, almost a century later.
Yeah, human nature doesn't really change, does it?
Nope. All right, listeners, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But don't worry, we'll be back soon with more thought-provoking insights from some of history's most fascinating minds.
Until then, go out there and make some friends and influence some people.
Nicely done. See you next time.